I knew exactly what kind of woman I was dealing with the moment Patty Kensington slid my reimbursement paperwork across the folding table in the Whispering Pines Community Center and signed incomplete, and with that smug little smirk that screamed, "What are you going to do about it?" She leaned back in her plastic chair like she was auditioning for a Real Housewives reboot, twirling the HOA gavel between manicured fingers that had never pulled a single weed in their life. The room smelled like stale coffee, cheap air freshener, and the sweat of a Karen bluffing through a game she didn't know I'd already finished. "Community improvement payouts are discretionary now," she announced, eyes flicking toward the window like I was boring her already. "We're tightening belts." "Not mine," I said quietly. She laughed. Actually laughed. I remember thinking, "You arrogant little pearl-clutching nepotism nugget," while I kept my expression neutral. She had no idea the seed had already been planted. She had no clue the amendment she'd signed last year, the one she didn't even read, just waved off with "run it by the committee," contained the exit clause I drafted myself with counsel that had teeth. If you're listening right now, and this feels like something you've been through, if some HOA tyrant or gatekeeping busybody try to bury your worth, hit that subscribe button and smash like. 97% of you watch without subscribing, but this is how we build a space where smart, quiet power wins. You help stories like this get heard. Back to Patty. See, I'd spent 8 years quietly managing vendor relations for Whispering Pines. I knew where every contract lived, which landscaping crews could be leaned on, and how to structure payment schedules so tight they could crack teeth. I didn't do drama. I didn't do neighborhood petitions. I did results. And I wrote addendums that looked like polite community guidelines, but read like war. My little office in the back of the clubhouse was 2 doors down from accounting and close enough to the boardroom that I could hear the volume rise when someone dared question the rules. Newer residents thought I was just the nice lady who organized the annual block party. The older ones knew better. They called me the quiet hook, the one who reeled vendors back in when negotiations drifted. I never raised my voice. I just rewrote the terms. Patty had started getting jumpy about bloat after that mid-year board retreat in Aspen. She came back talking about agile governance and financial recalibration. Translation: squeeze residents without looking evil. What she didn't know was that I'd seen this playbook before. 2 HOAs ago, different subdivision, same dance. So when the first budget cuts landed last December, I hired a lawyer, not to sue, to write. We drafted something elegant, a compensated reimbursement protocol tied not just to project expenses, but to any withheld payments, diluted refunds, or role eliminated under efficiency restructuring. I'd buried it in a vendor streamlining clause when Patty pushed me to take on extra duties. "Think of yourself as fractional community coordinator," she'd said. "I want flexibility." That word flexibility is the legal equivalent of a red alert. So I gave her flexibility with interest. Clause 3A in Amendment B4 read like a harmless footnote to the untrained eye. To a compliance auditor, it was a loaded gun. It said that in the event of any withheld compensation tied to contractual performance, I could trigger a lien against deferred payments across any vendor contracts I'd authored in the past 36 months. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was wrapping my fingers around the HOA's throat, gently, slowly, legally. And the best part? She signed it. Didn't read it. Just gave it the quick scroll and the "looks good if you're happy" treatment. Classic Patty. Flashover function. The woman couldn't negotiate her way out of a wet napkin if it didn't involve a golf cart or a wine tasting ticket. So while she was out glad-handing investors and disrupting things with buzzwords, I was quietly updating vendor clauses. I filed digital receipts, time-stamped drafts, escrow agreements, and I marked one little checkbox in my legal folder. Trigger ready. No fireworks. No warning shots. Just a soft click as the mechanism settled into place. The rest of the neighborhood had no idea. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't gossip. But I kept a whiteboard behind my garage door with one phrase I erased and rewrote every Monday. Don't flinch when the cut comes. Because it always comes. And when it does, the ones who flinch get nothing. The ones who prepare get everything. It started with the reimbursement, not the full severance package. Not yet. Just the $12,500 I'd fronted for the solar pathway lights and drought-resistant landscaping upgrade. The project Patty herself had begged me to lead last spring. "We need someone reliable," she'd cooed at the board meeting, waving her hand like some guru of neighborhood synergy. Incentivize performance. I hit every milestone. Hell, I beat them. And yet when the time came, the payout review turned into a dance. First, it was the treasurer needing clarity on my receipts. Then the board asking for supporting documentation I'd already supplied twice. Finally, Patty called me into her private president's office, which was really just her kitchen, and said in that signature half-condescending tone, "Let's not get precious about paperwork. We're all on the same team here." No, we weren't. And the second she said that, I knew exactly what was coming. The next week, I got an informal email from the board asking if I'd be open to a discussion about realigning my volunteer responsibilities. Corporate speak for, "We want your work without paying for your exit." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The moment that message hit my inbox, I walked to my desk, opened the password-protected folder labeled Vacation Options, and pulled the trigger on the first safeguard, a legal draft titled Notice of Contingent Lien Activation, ready to go to escrow. It wasn't a full launch, just a whisper into the system, but it was enough to alert the bank's compliance branch and notify our third-party escrow firm that per Amendment 3, AA lien could become active within 30 days if compensatory breach was verified. The moment Patty breached, the moment she failed to pay what was contractually owed, the chain would begin. And I wasn't the only link. You have to understand vendor relations in an HOA isn't just spreadsheets and phone calls. It's muscle memory, trust, and leverage. Over the years, I'd built our network: Greenscape Landscaping, Pinnacle Pool Services, Secure Gate Security, and the Trash Haulers, into something efficient and almost bulletproof. But I'd also made sure the key contracts, the ones that really mattered, bore a hidden clause buried deep. Payment terms restructured upon any board-level compensation disputes involving their author. Most vendors never even looked twice. Why would they? I was always fair, always on time. They trusted me. Patty? Not so much. That's where the dominoes came in. By mid-September, I'd noticed her doing her version of cost-cutting. Not by strategic planning, but by pitting neighbors against each other. She cut landscaping hours and tried to merge pool maintenance under operations excellence. She started attending vendor meetings without me, tossing around terms like dynamic price flexibility and Q4 renegotiations like confetti. The vendors were polite to her face and then called me concerned. "Is this lady for real?" one asked. "She thinks we're going to front chemicals without a PO." And when I tried to warn her, when I gently reminded her that slashing without strategy invites collapse, she looked at me over that same stupid gavel and said, "Paper doesn't mow lawns. People do." I stared at her for a beat too long. She smirked. "Don't be dramatic," she added. "We'll sort your numbers once the dust settles." That was it. That was the last time I tried to warn her. The last olive branch. She didn't see me as a strategist. She saw me as a secretary with opinions. And worse, she thought I'd wait. She had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead. That the document she'd signed in February under the banner of Community Pivot Strategy was actually the foundation of my escape hatch. That the innocuous phrase "payment delays exceeding 21 days after performance milestones met shall activate vendor-related financial contingency protocols" was written in blood, not ink. So I filed the draft. Not out of rage. Not even frustration, really. I'd already moved past that. It was clarity, cold, clean clarity. She wanted a game. I gave her a system. And systems don't blink. They don't flinch. They just execute. She didn't even wait until noon. My reimbursement was due by close of business Friday. But Patty had always liked to grandstand when there was an audience, even if the audience was just herself and a pair of overpriced reading glasses. She called me into her kitchen at 10:17 a.m. Sharp. No board witnesses, just her. That oversized granite island and the air of a woman about to play a card she thought would end the game. The moment I stepped in, I saw it on her face, the smirk of someone who thinks she's finally boxed you in. She didn't offer me a seat. She just waved a stapled packet of paper like it was yesterday's junk mail. It was the reimbursement agreement I'd prepped, the one with all the approved figures and final reconciliations, signed by accounting, initialed by legal, ready for disbursement. The agreement she had requested I draft. "I have reviewed your little community fantasy," she said, holding it up like she was reading a grocery list. "And I have decided." She tore it straight down the center, right through the line item that said $12,500, right through the column that listed my documented expenses, right through my name. "You're not getting a dime," she said with the satisfaction of a child smashing a sandcastle. "Take your clever clauses and shove them." I didn't move. I watched the pieces drift to her tiled floor, soft like snow. She thought it would rattle me, humiliate me, that I'd protest, argue, threaten, that I'd scramble to defend what I'd already earned. But I'd planned for this exact performance. I knew she'd eventually go full, small woman power trip. And I knew she'd do it without an audience, because women like Patty are only brave when there's no one around to see them flinch. So I said nothing. I reached into my bag, pulled out my community keycard and access badge, and set them neatly on the island. I didn't throw them. I didn't slam them. Just a quiet, clean break. No noise, no mess. She was still grinning when I turned around. "You think you're scary?" she called after me. "You don't run this place. You never did." I paused at the door just long enough for her to think I might respond. Then I walked out. No look back, no parting words, no scene, just the click of the door behind me, louder than any comeback I could have delivered. I walked past the front desk, past the retirees playing cards, past the wall of community achievement plaques I'd helped earn while Patty was out shopping for new rules. My inbox was still full. My calendar still had meetings. But I didn't cancel a thing. I didn't log out of the neighborhood app or send a goodbye email. I didn't owe them that. Let them feel the absence. Let them sit in meetings and wonder why the vendors weren't answering. Let them dig through shared drives and realize the systems weren't automated. They were maintained. Let them scramble when the files they took for granted stopped updating, because I was the update. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. Fall coming in hard. I walked to my car with one hand in my pocket, phone already buzzing with vendor texts asking if the rumors were true. I didn't answer yet. Let the quiet build. At noon, the deposit didn't hit. At 12:00, for I received the final confirmation email from escrow. Lien draft verified. Filing process queued pending breach validation. By 12:07, breach was officially validated. It had taken Patty less than 2 hours to hand me every legal key I needed. She thought she'd humiliated me, but all she'd done was start the timer. The confirmation came in at 3:58 p.m. Subject line, lock activation complete. It was short, clinical, almost boring. Just a few bullet points confirming what I already knew. Terms met. Breach validated. Lock engaged. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then closed my laptop and let the silence settle in. That soundless beat before a ripple becomes a wave. Patty had no idea what she just stepped into. 6 months earlier, when I'd filed the compensated reimbursement protocol with my attorney, I didn't just leave it in a drawer. I incorporated it into the books. Quietly, precisely. I marked the deferred reimbursement as a conditional receivable with a flag on disbursement failure. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't even buried. It was just there, legal, visible, and completely unread by Patty because she never actually read financials. Just skimmed the summaries with her treasurer's spoon feeding her big picture talking points. What the clause really meant was this. If the reimbursement wasn't paid by the contractual deadline, any funds attached to vendor performance bonuses and contracts I'd authored would trigger a 6-month operational hold under Article 14 escrow parameters. In plain English, a soft freeze on $1.7 million of the HOA's discretionary operating funds, money earmarked for vendor settlements, fulfillment floats, advance payments, and, ironically, board member perks. All locked. All untouchable. The trigger point, midnight. The system didn't care about pride. It didn't care about tone or intent or whether Patty had looked me in the eye when she shredded my agreement. It cared about breach, and breach had been logged. At 12:01 a.m., the bank's compliance monitoring system flagged the lien clause as active and issued a restriction order to all connected accounts. Transfers paused. Automatic payments halted. Any transaction touching a flagged contract got bounced with a pending escrow review notice. By 12:05, someone in finance had probably noticed that the weekly vendor disbursements hadn't gone through. Maybe they thought it was a glitch. They'd call it first, then the bank. But it wouldn't be an error message. It would be a lock, because the vendors whose contracts triggered the freeze weren't random. They were the core four, the ones who supplied the lawns, the pool chemicals, the security patrols, and the trash service Patty had never bothered to understand. The lifeblood. And they were the ones with clauses that tied payout terms directly to the status of my reimbursement. Not because they cared about me, but because they trusted my contracts. I built those clauses during renegotiations last year under the umbrella of operational stability. It sounded good in a meeting, made everyone feel secure. No one realized it was also the foundation for my protection. And now that structure was flexing quietly, legally, unflinchingly. The beauty of it? No warning sirens. No fireworks. Just subtle breakdown. A hold here, a delay there. Small things at first. One contract contained a net 7-day fulfillment clause with a 5% penalty on delay. Another had a rollover payment clause. If funds weren't processed by the 1st, the amount due doubled by the 15th. The third required prepayment for Q4 materials. All of them paused, and none of this required me to lift a finger. The moment she tore up that agreement, Patty set the whole thing in motion. I imagine she went home that night feeling triumphant, thinking she'd made her point, that she'd cut off a so-called leech, that she'd won. Meanwhile, her neighborhood's bloodstream had just started clotting, and she wouldn't feel the stroke until morning. The voicemail started stacking before sunrise. My phone lit up at 6:42 a.m. With the first one, an unfamiliar number from Greenscape Landscaping. By the time I poured my second cup of coffee, there were 4 more. Pinnacle Pool, Secure Gate, even the trash haulers, all increasingly panicked. By 7:20, one of them finally put it in writing. Per Clause 6B, we are invoking cash in advance until reimbursement is satisfied. Boom. That was the clause I'd added back in 2021 after a previous president tried to delay vendor payments. I'd fought to include vendor protection riders that would trigger in the event of internal compensation disputes. Most board members dismissed it as optics. They liked how it sounded. They didn't bother to read what it did. What it did was this. A breach of my reimbursement unlocked the vendor's right to request cash up front for all pending deliveries and revoke deferred payment options. And if those vendors didn't get paid, they could halt services without penalty. And now they were invoking it, not because they were angry, but because they were covering their asses. Patty was probably still sipping her overpriced latte when the first vendor called her direct line, demanding prepayment. By 8:15, I imagine her morning was in full meltdown. Procurement pinging finance, finance blaming accounting, accounting blaming the software. And the vendors, they'd already done the math. They didn't need my voice. They had the documents. They had their own counsel. And they had clauses I wrote that made it crystal clear. Breach the reimbursement and the terms shift in our favor. By 9:22 a.m., she called me. Not the board. Not legal. Her. I watched her name appear on my screen like a telemarketer from hell. I didn't pick up. She called again at 9:25, then again at 9:31. This time she left a voicemail. The first words were, "I need you to explain what the hell," and I hit delete. What did she want me to say? That she shouldn't have torn up a legal agreement? That shredding a document doesn't erase the terms she'd already violated? That just because I walked out quietly didn't mean I walked out empty-handed? This was the part women, like Patty, never understand. They think silence means surrender. That no confrontation equals no consequences. But what they fail to realize is that some of us don't fight loud. We fight smart. We fight on paper. And we win by letting the systems they ignored do the talking. The irony? I didn't even need to do anything that morning. The damage wasn't coming from me anymore. It was coming from the vendors, from her own infrastructure, the exact people and processes she'd sidelined, thinking loyalty was a given and contracts were suggestions. She'd built her little empire on handshake deals and smirks. I built mine in clauses. By lunchtime, 3 more vendors joined the freeze. One BCC'd me on the notice. Just one line in bold. As long as this clause stands, we stand down. And stand down they did. Meanwhile, I stood back and let it all unfold. I imagine legal got pulled in somewhere around noon. Once the 4th vendor stopped answering emails, and the 5th sent a formal suspension letter quoting verbatim language that hadn't passed across Patty's desk since February. At first, they thought it was a bluff. Maybe they figured a disgruntled ex-volunteer had stirred up noise, rattling cages, scaring the vendors. That's what Patty liked to believe, that everyone operated from drama, not structure. That I'd stormed out like a diva with a grudge, not a strategist with a binder. But legal doesn't run on ego. Legal runs on paper. And once they opened the folder labeled Vendor Addendum Amendment 3, the trap snapped shut with a soft click of comprehension. The letter was there, clear as day, notarized, time-stamped, and sent by certified courier 3 months prior. It began like any routine memo, professional, measured, dull even. Then came the sentence that flipped the floor out from under them. In the event of non-payment of contractual reimbursement, automatic lien rights activate per Consulting Agreement Amendment 3A Clause 9 be filed under discretionary operating capital provisions linked to vendor class contracts 14 through 27. They'd probably read it twice, then a 3rd time, and by the 4th read someone would have reached for their phone with fingers that didn't feel quite as steady as before. Attached was a schedule, neatly formatted, color-coded, signed off by escrow, detailing the amount of funds to be locked, specific contracts affected, activation conditions, breach of reimbursement terms, duration of lien, 6 months or until full settlement, escrow's fiduciary oversight. It wasn't a threat. It was protocol. The document didn't scream. It didn't accuse. It instructed. And that's the part Patty could never wrap her arrogant little head around. That quiet isn't weakness. That restraint isn't fear. That silence, when written into a contract, is just a time detonation waiting for the trigger. By 1:17 p.m., I got a text from a friend still on the board. Just 3 words, they found it. No explanation needed. At 2:03, someone from legal left me a voicemail, soft-spoken, polite, trying very hard not to sound cornered. We're looking to clarify some language in Amendment 3. Please return our call when convenient. Convenient. Convenience left the station when Patty tore my reimbursement in half and told me to shove it. What really must have put the panic into overdrive wasn't just the lien itself. It was the realization that it had been sitting there the whole time, a live wire in plain sight, filed, acknowledged, legally binding, and completely ignored. Because when you build your castle out of bluster, you don't look down at the foundations. You don't read the fine print. You don't imagine the quietest person in the room is the one who wrote the manual on how to burn it all down slowly, silently by protocol. And now they had to explain it to Patty. I would have paid good money to watch that conversation unfold. The look on her face when she realized the contracts she'd mocked me for obsessing over, the clauses she waved off like gnats, were now the very levers dismantling her liquidity. She thought the game ended when I walked out. But that was just a signal. The machine had already started moving. It always takes one domino, one big one. And at Whispering Pines, those Pinnacle Pool Services, our golden goose. Their contract accounted for nearly 40% of the quarterly maintenance budget. Their orders were routine, reliable, and big enough that Patty used to joke, as long as Pinnacles on the hook were unsinkable. Right? Unsinkable. That morning they sent an email. Not to me, I wasn't even on the org chart anymore, but I got a copy anyway. These things have a way of finding their way home. The message was cold, precise, and deadly. We've received notice of internal instability at Whispering Pines. Due to implications for fulfillment and vendor liability, We are pausing all active and pending services until further financial clarity can be established. That was it. No explanation, no apology, just a compliance kill switch. They didn't wait for a phone call. They didn't care what drama triggered the instability. All they needed was one line in one contract flagged by one vendor attorney who saw a lien filed against discretionary operating funds. And that was enough to halt millions of dollars mid-cycle. I heard the neighborhood went silent when the email landed. Not tense, silent. Because everyone, even the ones who had no idea what Amendment 3A was, understood what a pause pool service meant in July. Revenue tank. Dues vanish. Finis probable. Residents spooked. Someone forwarded me the internal group chat thread. First message. Anyone know what this internal instability is referring to? Next. Why is Pinnacle invoking compliance protocols? Then, did someone file an actual lien tied to our vendor flow? Pause. Next message from legal. It's an Amendment 3A. It's valid. And it was signed by Patty. I stared at that one a while. I could see it happening in real time, the unraveling. The way power doesn't explode. It erodes quietly like rust under paint. The minute they realized the president herself had signed a clause that allowed a single reimbursement breach to trigger a chain of vendor withdrawals, they must have felt the floor tilt beneath them. But Patty, she wouldn't admit it. Not yet. She'd pace, deflect, snarl. She'd blame someone else, probably accuse finance of hiding the amendment or claim I snuck it past her. But none of that would matter because the signature was there, dated, filed, compliant. I didn't forge it. I didn't sneak anything. I gave her the exact paperwork she asked for, and she signed it while texting during a meeting. You could almost hear the spin trying to start. Someone in the thread asked, "Can we claim the clause was activated in bad faith?" Legal's response was swift. The lien was conditional on non-payment of contractual reimbursement. The breach occurred. The lien is lawful. Boom. There it was. Non-attack. Not sabotage. Just math and memory, terms and timing, cause and effect. All the things Patty thought she was immune to because she talked louder than the room. That afternoon, another vendor joined the pile-on. Then another. Then the trash service from Nevada who'd never once missed a pickup window. Each time a new one pulled back, the fear inside the community compounded. Not because they thought I was out for revenge, but because now they understood I hadn't been bluffing. This wasn't emotional. This was structural. I'd built a system meant to protect my exit. They treated it like wallpaper. And now that system was working exactly as intended, while the president scrambled to patch a dam she didn't know was leaking. By the end of the day, someone texted me from legal. Someone who'd once joked that I overlawyered everything. Their message was just one sentence. Remind me never to underestimate your definition of backup plan again. I didn't post anything. Didn't call anyone. I didn't leak a thing. That's the part people never believe. They think when the machine starts breaking down, someone must be behind it, pressing buttons, pulling strings. But the truth is the system was already wired. The cascade wasn't a revenge fantasy. It was an insurance policy. And like any good insurance, it just needed the right conditions to activate. Turns out Patty met every condition. The first tremor hit when she tried to manually transfer funds between accounts. I heard about it secondhand. Apparently, she bypassed finance and went directly into the payment system, trying to reroute vendor capital to a discretionary slush fund they used for board events. The bank's compliance AI flagged the attempt within minutes. Anything touching a lien-bound contract was auto-monitored now, and the moment she pushed it through the system froze it. That's when the audit began. Not a soft one either. This wasn't some quarterly review with a polite checklist. This was a full-spectrum financial colonoscopy triggered by the bank's legal risk team. Because when an HOA under lien starts trying to shift money manually, it raises red flags. Not just about breach, but about intent. And once intent is on the table, everything gets opened. Vendor relationships, internal memos, signing authorities, even the timestamps on amendment approvals. I got a text from a vendor friend that afternoon. They're saying everything's paused. What the hell is going on over there? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The audit was doing the talking. By the next day, word had spread. Vendors who hadn't yet pulled out now slowed to a crawl citing pending payment clarity. Fulfillment partners issued compliance hold notices. One even requested financial stabilization metrics before continuing their service agreement. And then came the downgrade. Whispering Pine's credit rating dropped 2 full levels in 48 hours. Patty must have lost her mind. Not publicly, of course. She would have spun it. A temporary setback, an internal miscommunication, probably blamed the bank or some fictitious malware. But behind the scenes, I know what happened. Calls she couldn't return. Vendors she couldn't pacify. A board suddenly full of questions she couldn't answer because they'd all read the same clause by now. Amendment 3, A subsection 9, B signature line Patty Kensington. And in every meeting from that point forward, whenever someone said, "How did this happen?" or "Who built these contracts?" one name came up. Mine. A friend from compliance forwarded me a snippet from a leadership sync. The treasurer had been pressed hard, cornered by directors trying to save face. Did she build this entire clause cascade? Someone had asked. There was a pause, apparently. Then the treasurer leaned back and said, "She warned us last year." We laughed. That was it. No spin. No defense. Just the quiet admission that the fire had been marked on the map, and they walked straight into it. There's a moment, a very specific moment, when the noise fades and the system starts humming on its own and you realize you don't need to defend yourself anymore. You don't need to shout or approve or even show up. That moment had arrived. I was no longer the one making calls. The system was doing the work, and it was loud enough for everyone to hear. It came through late Friday afternoon, wrapped in the kind of faux formality you only see when someone powerful is finally out of moves. A PDF, 2 pages, time-stamped, CC'd to legal, finance, and escrow. The subject line, settlement terms, reimbursement, and lien resolution. The first paragraph was pure damage control in the spirit of mutual resolution. The kind of corporate apology that pretends it wasn't personal, just a misunderstanding of interpretations. But the second paragraph said everything that mattered. Full payment of owed reimbursement inclusive of contractually stipulated expenses, documented interest, and accrued late fees. The third paragraph, a written apology signed by Patty herself. It was dry, generic, no real emotion, but it didn't need to bleed. It just needed to exist. It was dated, on letterhead, admitting fault. A woman who once tore my agreement in half now had to sign a new one admitting that the old one had teeth. I forwarded it to escrow with one instruction: hold release until funds clear. Because that was the rule. That was the structure. No emotion. No mercy. Just protocol. The same one she'd mocked, ignored, and walked straight into. The funds cleared Monday morning. Every last cent, even the interest. And I didn't respond to her email, not out of spite, not out of pettiness, but because silence was the most honest thing I could give her. She'd always operated in noise, deals, bravado, posturing. What she feared most wasn't anger. It was irrelevance. So I gave her that, fully, completely. The freeze lifted by noon. Vendor payments resumed. Contracts unlocked. The hemorrhaging stopped. But the bruises remained. Residents had already flagged the instability in their own systems. Some paused indefinitely. Others rerouted complaints elsewhere. Whispering Pines didn't collapse overnight. HOAs like that rarely do. But the foundation had cracked, visibly, structurally, and in a way the board couldn't ignore. By the end of the quarter, they issued a memo. Due to evolving operational dynamics, Whispering Pines will enter a phase of strategic restructuring. Corporate translation: we bled out too far, too fast. Now we're scrambling to hide it. 2 months later, I accepted a new role, strategic advisor for a neighboring community that actually read their agreements, valued foresight, and paid their volunteers on time. My first week, I rewrote their vendor template suite, quietly, precisely, built it clean and tight. One of the partners asked if I had any clauses I liked to keep handy. I smiled and said, just the ones you never want to use. And the old clause, the one that started it all, still public record, still filed with escrow, still a reminder that some people fight loud and lose. But the quiet ones? We build systems that don't need noise to win.